we didn't know we were having, with someone saying, hey, listen, you called me. And maybe we were just too busy doing life that we forgot to pause to take issue with our technology and be aware of how we were affecting the world unconsciously. How could we? But forgive us for being too busy then, God, for having stuff that we don't attend to because we have too many things to attend to, for putting around us confusions and complications that we later regret because we never paused to think about ourselves and how uniquely we are made and how the things around us will either express our uniqueness or prevent us from expressing that uniqueness. But all the while, God, we stand in your grace and thank you for this moment. Bless our minds, as unique and particular as they are, with a unifying spirit to hear you speak to us as we need it individually, but the same voice. And allow your word to speak to us through hundreds and thousands of years, in fact. May we hear it freshly so. Speak to us as we have need, but the same voice may speak to us. And may we find, as we move from this moment, an opportunity to serve you and to experience you in ways that will be especially wonderful and invigorating. And where we will look to do that uniquely, God, let it be through the same glorification of your one Holy Spirit. God, we thank you for making us unique, but also one. Amen. So as we take a moment to turn to the screen here, today I want to identify some elements of biblical themes in African-American musical tradition. Because, this is Black History Month, and I know it's the shortest month of the year. It's a fact. But the fact that it is a month that has been declared as such doesn't make it any less important. In fact, as I've gotten a bit older and I've come to see the importance of my identity in myself, my children, my grandchildren, and just look at the world itself, the way we are so conflicted, many of us are really not. And those, I think, who are not are grounded in a sense of themselves that comes from a narrative that is not subject to popular opinion, to pundits, to the chatter class, as they call them, to those who even speak of the creation of fake news as something that's real, but rather as opposed to a phenomenon of someone deeply, deeply disturbed. There is a way in which when we encounter the world as our centered selves, we don't go to the moment to get our identities, because moments move in and out. They're episodic. They don't have duration. There's a song sung in African-American traditional hymnody. It says, build your hopes on things eternal. Hold to God's unchanging hand. And of course, in that language you find forward, it says, life is filled with swift transition. And so there's a way in which we recognize in that hymnic moment that we have to be able to ground ourselves in something beyond the moment. There are some people who are faddists, trendish. They're very trendy. They're in the moment, and it's cool. They have what is where the latest wear, they wear it. The latest phrase, they got it. The latest walk, they know it. The latest dance moves, they got them. That wasn't one, stay with me. But the point of it is that that's a wonderful thing. It's someone who can consume the culture and reflect it. Comedians are excellent at that. That's how they make their living, reflecting the culture with some critical kind of oddity that makes you go, and then ultimately you laugh. But I'm talking about identity is rooted in not the moment, but rather in a narrative that is grounded in a historical progression and development and evolution of a people over time. And that is really, really a fundamental part of what African-American religion has offered. It has in its traditions, in its ways of passing down meaning through forms such as music, through dance, through preaching, through singing. Not music, but singing. I'm talking about how we interpret the lyrics, how people can hold, and bend a note. I'm speaking to the contributions of Africans who have been in their diasporic condition, this dual consciousness that we bear, of being from there but here, as Du Bois would put it. Bearing that tension, there is in the bearing a innovative, creative power that African Americans have expressed. It is not unique to us. You'll find it wherever music has been expressed as one way, not always, but one way oftentimes that cultures grab hold of their story, codify it, pitch it to some kind of meter and find some melody for it, and they'll find a way to pass on through those beautiful phenomenological oddities of time and space and lyrical content, something that can be oftentimes terrorizing to hold forward. But yet, music somehow or another makes it palatable, makes it possible to take the impossible, if you will, and put it in a way that it can be passed on to others to grasp the impossibleness of those who came before them and how they faced it with courage, went through it with incredible tenacity and persistence. And in the story of African Americans in particular, where I'm focusing today, there is a certain beauty about transcendence that is really at the soul of America. And I would just encourage you during this month to watch very carefully the types of commercials and advertisements that you see. Take specific note of how the African American tradition, typically music, will be depicted and or reflected. You'll hear the voice singing. You'll see all kinds of celebrations and holiday kinds of things, when really holiday is not for commercialization. So you got to be careful, got to watch it, because you'll find yourself thinking that it's a holy day when they have a Martin Luther King car sale and you feel God has inspired you to buy an Audi. Be careful. You got to pay for that after a while. But I want to just push us to a more critical lens, and I believe you get this, but I want to encourage us to look specifically at a song that is sung so frequently throughout the month, and not just throughout the month, but in the African American religious tradition, you can find Lift Every Voice and sung in any gathering of people where there's something somber and something meaningful. So what I'm going to do tonight is, take us to the next slide, is spend some time looking at this particular theme as a recurring force that has defined a very critical part of African American consciousness in religion, that is. Let's read this together. This is Psalm 137. I'm going to use it as a touchstone, okay? By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and wept. Now, first of all, locating this in the Babylonian exile, these are the Jews talking about themselves in diaspora. Now, watch this now. They've been dispersed. See, they're not in their homeland. They're in Babylon. And how are they feeling? They're expressing at the very first line of this song, because a psalm is a song. In the very first line of the song, there is a statement of location and emotional distress. We wept. Let's read on. When we remembered Zion, which means you don't remember things that you have. So they're letting you know right now, we're not at home. We're not in Zion. Zion is also spoken of as the city of David, also spoken of Jerusalem. So just keep that in mind. There on the poplars, those trees, we hung our harps. Typically, when you hang your harps, you're not playing music. A harp is a musical instrument, right? And now watch this. For there are captors, now we get the context. We got slavery going on right now. Asked us for song. Our tormentors. Now this is called in Hebrew writing, Hebrews call this restatement of a previous line in different words, synonymous parallelism, running same time, saying the same thing, different words for emphasis. Want to make sure you get it. Got it? Good. Here we go. For there are captors asked us for songs. Watch it again. There are tormentors, same as captors, demanded, asked for songs of joy. All right? Synonymous parallelism. It's a powerful convention. The writer's trying to say, I really want you to get how potent, in this case, and how critically insane it was that captors would ask for joy from those who have been captivated. Oh, no, this is deep, heavy stuff. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion, exclamation point. Now, without exegeting this much, you get the tenor of what's happening in the location of this dispersed people, diasporic, dispersed. They're not in their homeland. They've been captured by one of the most powerful forces on the planet, the Babylonians, no joke. They are unable to express their natural joy. They're deracinated. And in the context of deracination, they're enslaved, and they're asked, while they're weeping, to sing. Are you with me? They're asking to weep and express joy at the same time. This is as graphic as it gets when it comes down to recognizing where African Americans, one place in the Bible, where African Americans resonate in their bellies with the biblical witness. Here we have the Hebrews saying, we are now in the diaspora moment of our life. We've been dispersed all over the place. We're captivated, can't get home. We're trying to remember home. We have no joy. We're weeping. And we're asked to entertain. Are you getting the parallel of this? We're asked to entertain our captors. We're asked to entertain the majority population. But we ourselves, the smaller people, deracinated, captured, experiencing distress. Now, it lets you know how far along they are into distress because they have hung their harps, as opposed to we have our harps on our shoulders, we have our harps ready to play. We've hung them, we're done, we're through, we have no reason for joy. We want to give ourselves completely to the experience of wanting to. Have you ever wept before? Let me see how I can explain it. If you have to ask the question if I've ever wept, you haven't wept. When you weep, it's a full-on expression, a total commitment to the expression of an emotion that is teetering, dancing on the precipice of despair. Weeping is when you give out all your energy toward it, and your body gets exhausted by the expression of distress. And the tears really don't have the kind of energy of a cry. A weep has more of a resignation to it. When my cousin had a puppy, he called him Bootsy after Bootsy P. Funk Collins. He bought a black Labrador. I never liked the dog because he was a puppy who was irascible. Puppies are irascible, but he wasn't my puppy. I hadn't identified myself as the alpha to him yet. And he grew kind of fast, too. But I kind of got a fondness to him because I realized he was just a puppy. He didn't know no better, trying to bite me with the little puppy teeth. He was just playing around. And I realized that I was kind of getting connected to him. And then one day, I came home from school, and Bootsy wasn't there. Pretty old black Labrador. He had gotten hit by a car. And all of a sudden, I felt that I was really starting to connect with him because I was saddened in a way that I realized when I cried about it, it wasn't a cry out like I could change the reality. He had already taken the puppy and buried him. This is back 70s. But I wept because I realized I couldn't do anything about it. It was so packed. I was informed and told about the action of the disposal of his remains. Couldn't even grieve him, really. Just resigned, powerless, impotent. That's what's going on there. Life has been taken out of them, but it's not fully gone. It's enough just to register distress, but not enough to do anything about it. And the power is so great, they find themselves asked to entertain those who have violated them. Watch the next verse, verse 4. Then they ask the question, after the exclamation point, how can we sing the Lord, songs of the Lord, while in a foreign land? Again, that it reiterates the issue of being in diaspora, dispersed. It makes it very clear. But this question of how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land is the predicament that I was getting to when I spoke of the African consciousness and the way African Americans have dealt with the challenge of being not at home in a foreign land and finding themselves a bodily challenge to the structures of power that be. Can't swim back home. Stay with me now. Don't know where we came from, really. So incredible was the Middle Passage and the systems that supported the selling of slaves, and the placement of slaves throughout the Caribbean and throughout all of diasporic locations was systematic, and it messed with the consciousness of Africans in ways I won't get into right now, but they are profound and still impacting the way we live. I've made note of about Snoop and others who call each other cousin. That's not an accident. There is within us an understanding about the way in which families were broken up, scattered intentionally. Languages were refused. They could not speak in slave ships. When they heard slaves speaking to each other, they would do all they could to violate that kind of interaction so it would not persist and give them a strength, solidarity of consciousness, solidarity of homeland, solidarity of identity. Fearing anything that looks like unity is power. Don't miss that, please. And if you look at all of the ways in which Africans who were deracinated were systematically separated, those separations were all designed to keep from the transmission of values, the transmission through the language, the transmission of understanding of self in context of a larger people. That's where real power comes from. Once you separate out, think about lions who typically do not actually go after the strongest of any herd, any group it's going after. It chooses the one that is weakest, the slowest. Lions aren't trying to expend all their energy to get a meal. They want to spend some time enjoying that meal. And they also understand that if they keep expending their energy like a cheetah, keep expending their energy and not finding dinner on the other side, there will be hyenas that will make dinner out of them. Lions are very judicious hunters. Cheetahs, all of that whole class, very judicious hunters, because they understand that if you exhaust yourself out on a hope to kill and get dinner and you keep missing, you will have no energy after a while. So there's a way in which cutting someone away from a group makes them a target and easier for them to be controlled and dominated. That's why people get picked on, and those people picked on oftentimes fight back with violence. You look at the history of those who've blown up buildings and gone postal. Not to just throw that out there, I'm sorry if I had to be offended, but just popular expression, but just people who lose a sense of boundaries and the sense of violence they've experienced, they visit that out on others en masse. That has a lot to do with people being pulled out and made to feel not just unique, but bad in their uniqueness. I started off tonight talking about uniqueness as something sacred, as a reflection of God. Sometimes uniqueness, redheaded kid, the one that's really tall, the one that's really skinny, they get pulled out. If that was you, just know that you were made, you have been made, and will always be a reflection of God, no matter what people say to you or about you. They do not have a right to redefine the narrative that God spoke over you when God said, "You made in my image, according to my likeness," over all creation. But now, in the experience of being pulled out, staying with the people now, people pulled out from their homeland and made to feel like a thing, an object of entertainment, I was making an homage to African Americans. You look at how the experience of African American males, I'll just be specific about that. I've heard them cry about this, heard them lament about this in my life on college campuses. 6'7", walks the campus. A young brother sees him and says, "I didn't see you on the team last year. Are you new?" 6'7" responds by saying, "Brother, I'm an engineering major. My hope is to be an electrical engineer in the next 2 years when I graduate from here. I don't play basketball. I like to watch it. That's as close as I get to it." The guy looks up, of course, at the 6'7" guy and says to himself, he probably just didn't make the team. There's ways in which we box people into categories, but specifically black males, if they have a certain height, a certain stature, if they fit a certain profile, they got to be an athlete. I lament that. And we as a culture and we as a people, no matter what your ethnicity, have to do better at making people who stand out, particularly those who could be seen as athletes. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there are other boxes they could be placed in, boxes that could release them to express themselves more creatively than just in the narrow matter of the musculature that they may have or the physicality they may have. There are more dimensions. But understand, part of that physicality, that whole view of musculature, has to do with the way in which slaves, their bodies were what? They were objects for work, and musculature and physicality was how they were prized, valued. It's a way of transferring a certain lens from a time when people were seen as good for a specific kind of productivity or kind of being, and unconsciously just transferring it over. Even black folk on black folk, young black man to other young black man, knowing that we are struggling always to just live, but then putting each other in a box. It's part of what you see in Native Son, something that we would talk about maybe another time. But that's something to just be mindful of, how sometimes we can place people in boxes, not even realizing that we've been conditioned to see a certain profile of people, black males, tall males, white males. Anyway, just if you're a certain height, you could be, oh, you must be in NBA. Maybe you play European ball or something, college ball. It's unfair. But it speaks to how we must be conscious and vigilant about the ways in which we have been shaped to see people in terms of profiles, in terms of stock characters or certain characteristics, as opposed to the unique expression of people to people. It makes it easier to just say, if you're 6'7", you must be a ball player, as opposed to you're 6'7", you're 6'7". So let me get to know you on your own terms as you are, not as I think you ought to be. Let's push to the next slide, please. Psalm 137, watch this. Now, this is where the beauty of the existential crisis and the way in which the Jews, the Hebrews, responded to it with a mind. Now watch the text here. If I forget you, Jerusalem, here comes the reference point. Watch this now. May my right hand forget its skill. Wow. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. May, that's just tense. It's like saying, I wish it would happen. It's almost like a prayer against yourself. May I lose my capacity to use my right hand, which means I won't be able to communicate, right? If I do not remember you, watch it again. If I do not consider Jerusalem, you, Jerusalem, my highest joy. So again, this is a deeply transgressive expression. It clearly says, in the context of deracinated life, the context of tremendous anguish, incapacitated in a way that this anguish is that one cannot express or engage in joy. Added to that is the oppressor's request for one to deny one's own existential reality as one oppressed and feeling violated and vanquished. Now, summon energy, not just to be, but summon energy to entertain me. Oh my God. Then comes this statement. This is where the beauty of this comes, and I believe among African Americans, I'm just speaking to that culture, our culture, my culture, that being able to take a turn, this is like the blues coming up, or maybe lament, same thing, in that first 4 verses. But now this turn, if I forget, notice the language goes from I am in a place I did not want to be in. I'm experiencing an emotional downturn that I did not expect or want, didn't bring it on myself. Added to that is the expectation for me to violate my own self, and out of my own, now watch this, out of my own sense of violation and distress, I am to turn out joy. Can you tell me what the blues is? Good morning, heartache. What's new? There's a way in which even in the very genre of, you may call it lament, I would call it a blues, they're interchangeable. In this lamentation, in this moment of calling out the truth of one's reason for despair, there is a radical turn, and it has to do with the most fundamental way, and I cannot explain it today. There's just no way I can get to it without doing some more reflection of how it is. There's no real answer I've ever seen. How it is that African Americans, that Jews, that the people who've been oppressed are able to make a turn from looking at the facts of their situation, violent, violated, deracinated, and yet turn toward a spiritual consciousness that says, within myself, I have the capacity through memory. You can't take my memory, can't touch it, it's not physical. They're going to spirit now. If my memory does not fix itself on Jerusalem as the highest joy, I hope that I don't have the right to speak. I hope I don't have the right to move my arms. I would hope that I would lose the functions that I have every day. Remembering, I'm saying, and this is why I'm talking about Black History Month, the remembrance of one's self as an expression of God. I can't describe that except to say it is what God does among the people who are oppressed. And I do believe, brothers and sisters, if you think about Jews in this world, the contributions they have made, Scripture violated people, and the way in which that history moves through Judaism to the Christian, who you look at, say, 1 Peter 1, you see that they're dispersed out. There's a way in which, and really, the Greeks and Romans, folks have all been, this is not unique to us, but there's a way in which in African-American culture, I'm going to push on the lift every voice and sing, that we have been able to make a turn out of the eye, but be very careful. It is not someone who is saying that I have this transcendent power alone. This is a song, but it's sung as a corporate voice. Go back to the first slide, please. Verse 5, though I. But look, it says, when we remembered. You see, in the collective consciousness, there is a power that allows for the transition, for the transgressive act of turning from within one's own context of violation, a power that allows one to transcend, yet not be out of it, but in it at the same time. That is the beauty, the ineluctable beauty of soul. One is able to stand in a moment where it makes no sense that you would be able to sustain consciousness, logic, health, and yet you took those ribs that were really spare, which means nobody wanted them. There's no meat. I'm talking about soul food, using the word soul as a riff. There's no meat. If you eat ribs, you work. It's not like eating a steak. It's not. You are working. But you understand how ribs can be now $20, $30 for a plate. If you go to a barbecue spot, a really swanky one, you can spend $30 on just like a meal with just spare ribs. Think about it. Ribs that were not useful. They were spare. We don't even need them. No. The loin the master took. All the best parts of the pig master took. Left those spare ribs over for us. What did we do? We just made it work. But we did that because there was this ineluctable spirit that was remembering a power that was not just external and related to, but within. All right, let's push on. Let's go to the next one. There we go. So we'll look at this choral composition. This is Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, written in 1900, oftentimes referred to as a hymn, sometimes an anthem. But taking it as an anthem is a choral composition based on a biblical passage for singing by a choir in a church service. So, Oxford Annotative. So, I want to talk a bit about this, a little context. May or may not note this. But the song, Lift Every Voice and Sing, authored initially, 1900, it was sung as a poem. Dig this. When James Weldon Johnson wrote that with his brother Rosemont, it was supposed to be for a President's Day celebration. They were going to, have a special speech. But he chose to he had a poem he'd written, and he had 500 students sing this poem. Didn't think anything of it. Then about 5 years later, Booker T makes a recognition. Now, when Booker T. Washington makes a recognition of that as a powerful leader, you look at Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois, two powerhouse leaders, it became pretty much recognized as something there. Then watch this, President in 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt names Johnson to a diplomatic position in Venezuela and Nicaragua, which means it gives credence to him as someone of status, all right? Push on. Now, in 1935, the NAA, the National, my dad would call it, I'm just thinking of how he would say it, he would call it NAACP, National Association of Colored People, dubbed the song Black National Anthem. That's where it got its first anthemic, if you will, kind of tag. Then 4 years later, there was an inspiration that it served to be for this huge harp that was part of the World Fair. That put it like, wow, what made you want to do this huge harp? The song. Now, watch this. In 81, Black Lutherans and Episcopalians decided to include it in their hymnology. And that began codifying it. In other words, this song has about an 80-year history before it really gets to the place where it's now in a book somewhere where people will refer to it, use it, have access to it, pass it on, learn it, make it standard. That's 80 years. Watch the next slide. And then, the 117th Congress. You'll find that the House of Representatives sponsored a bill. This was just a year ago, in March the 5th. James Clyburn sponsored a bill to amend, title is 36, United States Code, establishing this as a national hymn for the United States of America. So you see, in this movement from 1900, about 120 years before it got itself to a place where America says, oh, wow, let's hold this. Let's hold it dear. So just giving you a little history about the movement of that particular little poem that he wrote, James Weldon Johnson. Now, just to give you a little more about those cats, the primary writer, James Weldon Johnson, was a lawyer, teacher, a poet, a diplomat, said, first to lead NAACP 10 years. Then, watch this, first black professor ever hired at NYU. Said he served as a U.S. consul to Venezuela and Nicaragua. And then with his brother, John Rosamond, he authored about 200 songs. So this was one of many. But he also was a production artist for Broadway. This brother was bad, all right? Maybe I can show you a little picture right quick. Come on, next one. Just to put a graphic on it, that's James Weldon. That's his baby brother, Rosamond. Got it backwards. It's Walden on the right, Rosamond on the left. It's a sharp brother. See if I can. Okay, I tried it. All right. But as you can see, pictured by a piano, the brother was really more of the writer of music and put more time into music, although as a lawyer and also as a diplomat and working in government, he didn't have a lot of time. He was a principal at the time that he actually read that poem in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. So very colored history, very powerful story. Let's go to the next slide. Now, I'm going to get more into the text of it. The very, very first verse of Lift Every Voice and Sing reads as such, on left, verse 1. Lift every voice and sing, till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as a listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Now, when you see this verse, what I've done is placed on this side scriptural references to kind of help us see where thematically some inspiration may have come. Now, there were not a lot of notes specifically that I could put my hands on about what inspired it, but you can see thematically. Watch, for example. You have this ascending line here, lift every voice and sing. And then you have here, worship the Lord with gladness. These directives to an audience is a way in which the psalm, because remember, psalms are songs, the songwriter intended for these to be chorally, to be sung, to be communally uttered, communally expressed. It was designed, therefore, to help a people galvanize itself around its relationship with its history, first of all, but to do so in a way that earth and heaven will ring. And one fundamental theme that we see there, right here, this fourth line, is liberty. Remember, we started off looking at Psalm 137, the way in which the mind of the writers, the Hebrew writers, captured the crisis, the situation of being enslaved. Well, naturally, what's the thing you do when you're enslaved? You want to be free. But not all people, to be very clear, not all people enslaved want to be free. Now you say that sounds a little unfair, Reverend. But didn't Jesus ask a man, do you want to be healed? Why? Because he was very clear that sometimes the way that oppressive forces, be they psychological, physiological, physical, they do affect and can deplete the will. And there is within the powers that are oppressive, when their strength is felt to be greater than this is where it gets deep. When the pressure is seen as greater than one's capacity to bear up under it, one can simply give in. Have you ever given up before? You ever tried to pick up something that was just too heavy? I can't do it. You got help, but they couldn't help. You ever just given up on something that was simply bigger than you? Ever been in a fight? You couldn't win. You decided, little kid, I can't beat this guy up. He's just too big. She's just too big. There are ways in which, in our experience, we give up. Now, what's important is that if you think about images of the dogs that Bull Connor unleashed, you think about those graphic images, those moments of those water, the pressure of a water hose that you could see yourself would just push people across as if there was some kind of cartoon character, just push people into the distance. Those powers were designed to make a person feel crushed, to push them to the point of weeping, where they no longer express agency, but rather relent and retract and retreat into a sense of lost agency. And when one begins to lose or surrender agency, that's when the captor says, now, I will now dictate what your agency will look like. I'll tell you what to want. I'll tell you what to do. Although you're weeping, go back to Psalm 137, although you're weeping and I see you've hung your harps, clearly it's object of surrender, I'm going to tell you that now is the time to be of joyful value to me. Forget you don't matter. Your feelings don't matter. You don't matter. You are a thing to entertain me. That experience, real, powerful, profound. And the music of the Hebraic culture, of that tradition, captures it and says, do you see the insanity? Now here's the question. When they ask, how can we sing the Lord's song while in a foreign land? It wasn't just that we're not at home, like we're on a trip. Let's sing the song while we're, I'm in, Venezuela, I'm in, Spain. No. It's saying, how do we sing the Lord's song when we find ourselves violated, deracinated? And how do we sing it? And it's not just any music. Stay with me. It's the Lord's song. They're trying to say, God, we are in a place now that we've never been in before. And we are trying to find a way to believe that you still see us, still matter to us. These songs are songs about our relationship with you over time, what you've done for us, who you are to us, who you've revealed yourself to be to us. But now we're trying to find a way to sing those songs because we really are saying to you, God, would you help us sing these songs? Because it seems like you've stepped away and have allowed us to become violated and objects of someone else's entertainment. We thought we were chosen to love you and for you to love us. What happened to the pact? What happened to you being the God that would protect us? You're the Yahweh Sivaoth, right? You're the warrior God, the God, that Yahweh Sivaoth. That's the phrase you'll see when David would go to battle, for example. He would call on the Lord God Almighty, not just any old side. It's like when my kid would call me and say, hey, Dad, as opposed to, hey, Pop. Dad, typically they need something, some action. Pop, they just want to just check in with you, see how you're doing, The way that we refer to God reflects where we are and how we want to be, how we want to encounter and how we want to relate to God. So if you're in distress, you call on a God who is powerful and ever-present. If you're weary, you call on a God who heals and brings peace and brings energy. If you're defeated, you call on a God of victory and power, who is the King of kings and Lord of lords. There's a way in which all of those are available to us, but in the context of being a people in love with God, in the context of your own spiritual walk with God, when you find yourself experiencing the oddities that do not have answers, these kind of phenomena that you just don't know how to even pray about, don't even know what words to use. Now we're talking about understanding what it is to be in this situation. Now again, it's not hard if you're an African American. It's not hard if you're anybody in America. You can relate to, as a people, you can relate to victimization. America has not loved anyone thoroughly, from the people who were here natively to those who've come since then. Hates is put in, Trump doesn't have, unfortunately, you may think he has the market on that. No, there's blood spilled for everybody here, the Irish, Japanese, the Chinese, name the people. If they've come here, they've been violated. So by no means would I ever present African Americans as some other sui generis when it comes down to suffering in America. No, we're not unique to that experience at all. But I have to relate to it from my own skin. I can't speak of what it's like to be a woman violated, a person who is very, only so tall, who has to deal with that, the looks. And I can't relate to someone who has lost an arm. That's not my experience, but I can speak to being in my skin, melanin skin, African American skin. Dr. Randall Bailey, a mentor of mine, in graduate school, and to this day, someone who has affected my life deeply, profoundly. Mother, Jewish, father, African-American, scholar of biblical Hebrew, employed me to teach sometimes his biblical Hebrew classes. Beautiful man, a wonderful spirit, was doing a lecture in, I think, South Africa, I think it was. And he, being of these two different cultures, these two races, if you will, presents fair. And he recounted to me a story of a certain crossing point where all the brothers were going to go on and just go visit, hang out. But because of his skin color, they had to say, I'm sorry, brother, you can't go with us. So as a brother, you're a brother to a point, but when it comes down to the deep melanin, the kind of, as if we can say that none of us have been affected by European blood, but just the presentation of the dark skin, he didn't have that. So they had to ask him to get out of the car and go back. And they were buddies and scholars and colleagues up to that moment, but when it came to this particular checkpoint, they said, we can't let you do this because it will not go well for you. And I think about how that is in that moment as a biracial man, that here he is confronted with that by his friends having to be placed aside because he was not purely one of them, if you will. That's the dual consciousness that I think many of us feel at many given points. It's whenever you feel like you've been excluded for reasons you can't control. But that exclusion then gives you limited access to something, be it a joyful moment, be it for something that reinforces who you are, be it access to a ritual, be it access to a people and time, be it access to a memory that you will be excluded from forever, that will hurt you and make you feel the split in your soul and make you feel like being unique isn't blessed. But yet there is that way in which the splitting that we endure in Christ, we find oneness, we find wholeness. That's where Christ comes to bring healing. The hard part is to deal with the reality of being excluded because of something you didn't do, because of something that you are. How do you apologize? How do you get someone to have to feel like they need to apologize for being in their skin? You ever been there? Ever made someone want to feel that way? Ever make someone who was biracial have to choose? Which side you going to be on? A lot of comedians crack jokes about that. But it's not funny, really, when in the end, we're talking about being. We're talking about split being. And standing in split being as someone who has to say, God, now tell me how to be who I am and love you and feel that you love me. It's not an easy question. I don't present it as one. I'm simply trying to get you into they would say, the Sitz im Leben, the setting, more of a Sitz in terms of setting, in terms of mind, than in just time and place. As we push on, let's go on through this. Let's go back to the slides where we start to look at the comparison of this notion of liberation. You see this. Joy to the Lord, all the earth. Earth and heaven ring. There was a certain celestial and terrestrial dynamic in the way in which James and his brother wrote the song, reflecting Scripture. This kind of collective understanding that I am leveraging divine and eternal power in this moment. I'm enlisting these two dimensions. You can't tell earth to sing unless you have kind of regal power, but they did. You can't tell heaven to sing, surely, but they did. There was an understanding that there is a power that they have to enlist heaven, at least in this case, to ring it, in this case, to engage it. All the earth, worship the Lord with gladness, come before him with joyful songs. Next one, watch this, Psalm 66:4. All the earth bows down to you, they sing praise to you, they sing the praises of your name. There's a way in which the mind was grasping this bigger than life force. I'm gonna push on the next verse because I know time is running and I don't want to miss this. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Look at Psalm again. All the earth bows down to you. They sing praise to you. They sing the praises of your name. You see the singing happening. The bowing down has to do with the movement that is captured in this particular text. I'm going to push on because I want to get to some pictures here to kind of show you something that. Go to the next slide, please. Now, this stone in the road we trod, bit of the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died. That is one of the most powerful lines I've ever read in any kind of poetic statement. Yet, see this movement here, this conjunction, how it goes a different direction? Yet with a steady beat, have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? ? This speaks to, come to the place for which our fathers sighed, speaks to the same notion of the promised land. Sighed, hope to get to the place of being free, where you are yourself in your place and you are secure in your nationality and identity. And there's a certain stance you have because you are somewhere located that you call home. But there's a weariness recognized there. And there's a weariness recognized there that speaks to what happens in the Psalm 23. You may know this one well. It's often used to comfort people during times of funeral and bereavement. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, there it is right there, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You have to see in this, and I know it may be hard because it's not stated, but there is, at this turn, I submit to you, God. It's the you are with me. For the way in which I do believe, the transmission of the idea of God's ever-presence in this particular verse happens, is that there's something that allowed the people who felt hope unborn dying, get the image and how profoundly poignant that is. Hope unborn died, yet with a steady beat. You have hope unborn and steady beat. You see the contrast there? That kind of contrastive energy is transgressive to the core. It speaks to the fact that a part of us is dying, but at the same time, there is something that we cannot explain that's beating in us. That is black genius. Push it. Have not our weary feet come to the place for which our fathers sighed? The connection, you see, to a people, fathers, very important. Because while a deracinated people are always trying to figure out who they are and trying to make connections, you're my cousin, you're not, could you be? There must be some way of saying, I will hold myself in fidelity to the fact that I did not get born here. I did not get created here. My genesis is not in this moment or even slavery or even my existential reality born, but rather it precedes that. Even though I'm born here, I still have fathers, I still have mothers who come from a place where my melanin comes from. Come to the place for which our fathers, our mothers, our father's side. Even though, yet, these have the same kind of energies. Even though you're in a place where there's a sense of death, darkest valley, still there is a certain fearlessness, a certain courage that God is present. And has it been the story of people, black people, that God is present? And right now in the pandemic, I want to call this forward. It won't be long before we close out tonight, but I want to call forward why this song has power, particularly now. One thing I am certain about this pandemic is that it has changed the way we believe. We believe, as a matter of faith, in that which does not exist. The Bible tells us we have the power to call that which is not as though it were. But I know there have been too many times that people, maybe you during this time of the pandemic, have been asking God to just heal this land. Hadn't happened. Many times you've asked God to maybe save someone that you heard who had COVID, and you hoped that they would be strong and live, and maybe they didn't. And I'm sorry about that, because the way in which COVID has come upon us, it has made us wonder, is God sleeping? Is God in the weight room lifting because God isn't strong enough to deal with COVID? Or has God just forgotten that we're here suffering? Or does God just not care? Well, somehow or another, those questions, like how do we sing the Lord's song in a strange land while we're experiencing oppression? That is the question that the soul wrestles with. And I'm not want to give you quick, easy answers. I won't do that to you. That's not fair. But it takes courage, my brothers and sisters, to turn to the question and ask, how do you do it? As opposed to saying, I'm done. It takes courage and a certain transcendent understanding about who you are in the face of God, not in the face of where you are, but in the face of God, that can't be explained easily. Music has to move us to another level so that we can just experience it. Forget trying to explain it all the way. How do you explain a phenomenon? How do you explain God's grace? How do you explain God's love? How do you explain God? Hold on. Chill out. It ain't gonna happen. We do the best we can to do our theology, our Christology, all of our ologies, but they're all ologies, they're all studies of. But the experience of God is what I'm saying, is what this music, this scriptural moment is about really encountering God in the face of power. You can't hear Paul, you can't hear we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities, and not know that powers and principalities are real. There's no way to do that. And there's no way to understand that the wrestling, that is what this is about. The wrestling with powers and principalities must be somehow or another addressed. Music, I am saying in this instance, both in the thousands of years old tradition of the Hebrews, the Psalm, Psalter, and in more recently, as recent as 1900, in the 120 year or so history of this song, the same liberation intention exists, which means the same powers that have been trying to squish out life still exist, which means the same transgressive energy that God visited to us through the Jews, through the Hebrews, today is still manifesting itself through the African-American tradition of music. This is just only one instance. You could call up Mercy, Mercy Me with Marvin Gaye. You could call up When Will There Be a Harvest by the Isley Brothers. You could call up all kinds of music. All We Need Is Love. There's no way to understand it besides to say that when we look at the cultural expressions of people oppressed, look carefully. When they do maintain, when they do survive, it's because they use various forms of innate creative power that cannot be touched. That's spiritual right there. You can't stop someone from imagining something. You can take their eyes out, you can take their hearing from them, but you can't stop the mind, the spirit from intending. There's where real power is. We call it soul, if you will. That's how you get that, as I said, ribs. That's how you get all those things that I call slavery food. I'll be honest, I can't eat a lot of that stuff. That will burn me up. But a lot of that is stuff that was just not of value to the master. We transformed it into survival. Now that doesn't make sense, but that's the nature of soul. And from that soul, you find the very impetus for beauty, be it dance, think of Alan Ailey, be it a Kobe Bryant when he was alive, or Julius Erving, that kind of poetic genius, the Marvin Gaye's in their speaking, Billie Holiday's in their phraseology, the Sojourner Truths and their defiance of everything you can understand about what it means to lead and be free and powerful. How could someone whose history of slaves be about freeing people? Why not the ones in power be the one to free? Don't understand that. But I deeply have come to believe, and I don't know if I'll stand any other way, that God has used the most oppressed moments and most oppressed people because A, God has their attention. B, they're willing to ask the question. C, because they've not been oppressed and eliminated, they have this ineluctable understanding about truth and who they are. They just simply cannot be redefined or stripped from them by their existential reality of being oppressed. And because of that, they are naturally in a cry-out moment to God. Soek, they were called out to God. That is dialogue. That is you are responsible, God, for answering the question of why now, where those who in power think they're God. It's a very different dynamic. And I do believe because those people, I were part of that tradition, you're part of that tradition, who call out to God, for whatever reason, mad, angry, defiant, but they want a response from God. Help me right now understand, if you can't get me out, help me understand why this is. You hear the very same words in Jesus. You hear him. Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani. My God, one of his last words on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? You owe me an answer. I'm not going out of this like this. I want to talk to you about what's happening because we're in relationship to the very end of this. And because of that relationship, I have a right to ask you questions to help me understand where you are in this relationship with me. You ask me where I am? Okay, I got it. But I have the same level of accountability for you. That's a very different understanding that you may have with God. But yeah, many of us hold anger against God because we called out on God. They didn't come. They didn't bring our son back from crack. They didn't bring our daughter back from that bad relationship. They didn't give us. They didn't. Where were you, God, when I needed you? Okay, when you need me, I won't be there. That is for many people, too many people, I fear, where they've landed. because there's a view that God must somehow or another be left off the hook, so they don't keep pressing God. They ask a question and let it go. I want to press you for this. Do not let God go. Our history is that we have suffered for thousands of years as a people believing in God, far before this moment in time. But God has not been let off the hook. Let me push some pictures forward, please. Keep going. Don't have to ask you what that is. Don't have to ask you who that is. How do we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? Next one, please. Middle passage. A rendering, of course. There'll be more excrement. There'll be more unthinkable disgust in the picture. But as you can see, they're crowded in, Africans, brothers, crowded in like that. And you do know that they only took the strongest ones that they could find. Those Africans that were deemed weak, they would say, well, if they jumped over or didn't live because of dysentery or any other disease, well, they weren't strong enough, so they shouldn't have made it. Throw them over the side. I'm talking about the history. Next picture, please. Those people stand around the table, the base of that tree. The song that was sung called Strange Fruit. Those are white men. Those aren't black people. And that man hanging is black. It could be for any reason. Maybe he looked at a white woman. Maybe a white woman said he looked at her, but he didn't. For whatever reason, how do you sing the Lord's song in a strange land? That is the question that was asked in the text. And this is why we ask it today. We still ask the question because we need to. Next slide, please. That's real time, folks. That's not a rendering. That's the back of a man beaten savagely. Welts, those keloids, raised on his skin. No, I deeply believe that the religion of black people, of my people, and if you're not black, I trust that the reason why the black church, this church, is of value to you is because our sons and daughters are your sons and daughters. Your struggles are our struggles. And that Martin King, as one of the often turned to, but not clearly the only one, who was a champion for justice, wasn't just for us. Yes, it was civil rights, but if you look at it carefully, it was human rights toward the end. He had expanded it out because he understood that it was too local, too parochial, that the human quest, out of the soul of this deracinated people, the human quest to be whole was a human quest to be whole. That people all over the world were violated. People all over the world were feeling as if there was a greater power than God. And God was saying, I'm in you. Look at what Gandhi did to the British government. Had the empire paused. Look at Martin Luther King did. It's one guy with a whole bunch of people, of course. But the power to halt, to make an economy pause. Next slide, please. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Now watch this part. After all I've just shown you, still the voice says, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places our God will remember me, lest our feet stray from the places our God where we met thee. We will still hold ourselves in relationship with you. We will not stray. Lest our hearts drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. I would encourage you to hold this song, no matter what ethnicity you find yourself in, whatever you call yourself, because the trick that has been played, and that's why I went to the legislation to show you what the House of Representatives had done. Thank God for Brother Claiborne. But the challenge is that by labeling it Negro National Anthem, it does locate it within a people, very important. But be very careful, because when you use the word Negro, and I know African, American, colored, Negro, Black, I want to just encourage African American just for a moment, only because I want to hold up the American part. You see, the contribution that this song has, as these former slaves, the children of former slaves have made, is to say that the history of resistance, liberation, the turning toward the forces of darkness that violate people, that want to suppress votes, the people who want to be the attorney generals, to make sure they can control how elections run and skew them with all kinds of stupidity at polls. The systems that have been used to keep America in violence, seed on hate, suppression, division, for the evil one comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But when we take the African American and place it with this song, what we say is that it's yours, America. It belongs to all of us. Those welts you saw were visited on American soil. The hanging you saw, that was on American soil. And the resistance to those insidious, wicked moments of, Gardner Taylor would call them pockets of recalcitrance, that's America's history. But it also has a history of resistance and transcendence. And we cannot lose that, is my point. You have to be able to claim it if you're white, if you're white from Irish, white from Sweden, if you're born in India, if you are part of the folks that knew it, people, whatever it is, if you're on this soil, you have a right. That's your legacy. The wounds are your legacy, but so is the work of transcendence your legacy as well. You can't take one without the other. And you can't let it be bastardized. You can't let it be commodified so that you forget it has efficacy. It has a purpose, it has a power to help you, to put into you a rhythm of transcendence, of liberation. And for you to sing it so that when you sing it, you can see who is not liberated and sing it for them in action, not just in words. It is for everybody who is American to claim this as part of its history. Hence, the making of it as a U.S. treasure, codified now by the 117th House of Representatives. It does say that America, this belongs to you. You created the violence, but you also can create healing. That's the point. You can visit violence, but you can also visit transcendence and liberation. They're two sides of the same coin. You can't have oppression without freedom. You can have joy without sorrow. And so it is for us to be able to embrace the musicology that has the themes of life in it. Liberation is only one theme. It has built into it looking at the force with courage of oppression. It has a resistance action, and this time it's musical, but it's also the imagination that will not be somehow or another ultimately vanquished, cannot be controlled, it cannot lose itself, it can't be touched. And the slaves, they knew this. These creative people use music as a power that has always been the power that no one can control. But it can free us, is what I'm saying. And as you sing in your music, just build it in. Put those in there. In the very same way that James Weldon and Rosemont didn't think it'd be more than a poem, it has become something, I think, a touchstone of a theme of people. America right now is trying to breathe, frankly. It ain't just us. We're trying to breathe. And the choking powers, and they're not small. And our vigilance when it comes to voting, our vigilance when it comes to speaking, our vigilance when it comes to organizing, our vigilance when it comes to recognizing what's going on in races, our vigilance recognizing what's going on with the next election, the next presentation of perhaps a sister that could be one of the first, yet another first. These are not small things. That a white man is doing it, not small. But we can't forget the history, because it's just right there, right back. It's just a few steps back. So while you dance and you sing, I encourage you, when you find yourself personally unable to figure out how you're going to express yourself in a moment where it makes no sense, where you don't feel agency, you got a tradition to pull on, is what I'm saying. That's where God has moved. God has been moving for thousands of years in the same way. Musically, can't touch that. Not playing with hammer, just came out that way. But draw on it. Sing those songs, hum those songs, learn those songs, share those songs. That's where your power comes from. I thank you for being with me here tonight. I thank you for being with each other here tonight. And I pray that you will be able to, as you look to and listen to this song, you're going to hear it throughout the month. I pray that you listen for God speaking through it. I pray that you adopt music that you can hear God speak clearly through. And that the God that you hear is not a God that is syrupy, a God that is blind or somehow or another off the hook or unconcerned or unengaged in struggle, because we are all struggling. I pray that you will take the courage to make sure that you surround yourself with the kind of inspiration, melodically, musically, that grounds you in your reality but helps you to stand with it with clarity, tenacity, and God. And you carry those hard, unanswerable questions with you, those ineluctables, those unanswerables, those things that will not go away, but there's a faith that we have a right to express that doesn't need to have full-out explanation. That's what faith ultimately has, not. In that moment, you are transcending, but you're not ignorant of this world. And you're not removed from responding to this world, but you're not bound to this world. Don't forget Jerusalem. I do plan to make a trip to Africa. I do plan. My son's been several times. He lives over in Saudi Arabia. He tells me about South Africa. He tells me about Nigeria, Liberia. A part of me shakes when I think about that. Just like Muslims want to get to Mecca, I do want to see what it looks like to see someone who looks like my uncle. Like the Irish, when they go to Ireland, or folks from Mexico go to certain places and they go, when that city's related to me. Maybe I won't be at home there, but I probably will feel my soul healing there. I thank you for being here. Go forward. Listen for the Lord speaking to you. Celebrate. Be strong in it. God, we thank you right now for the history of resistance, the history of your spirit. When we cannot understand how it is that we have worshiped you, we thank you for allowing us to. In the most impossible situations, we thank you for the legacy of our old brothers and sisters who wrote the Psalter, the Psalms, for our older brothers and sisters that wrote the music of resistance that we use to understand ourselves. Our souls look back and wondered how we got over. We thank you for all those nameless faces who died in the hull of slave ships, who found themselves buried in the Atlantic with no ceremony, no grave markers, no respect. We know, God, that there have been many who have tried to tell us that we are what we have been and that we are worthy of how we've been treated. And we know through your unexplainable power and presence that simply isn't so. And we rebuke in our own personal lives any force, anyone who seeks to make us feel like we are less than divine. They're liars. The truth is not in them. We pray that you heal their minds so they see us as we know that we are. We are your creatures. We are divine. And we cannot be squelched. We cannot be squashed because you're within us, richly abiding. And I pray that anyone right now who wants to accept Jesus Christ, where they stand, where they sit, by confession of their faith, by believing in their heart and expressing on their lips that Christ was raised from the dead, they would be saved. And to your glory, God, if they would simply let us know online, we'll look forward to saying to them, brother, sister, thank you for being here tonight, and amen.